Our next speaker is Mr. Ed Skoudis. Ed is founder of a company called CounterHack, which designs, builds, and operates InfoSec challenges and simulations, including Cyber City Net Wars, Cyber Quests, and Cyber Foundations. Ed has authored, he's the author of two of probably the best SANS courses out there, the penetration testing class, SEC 560, and then the incident response class, SEC 504. Ed also performs security analysis and penetration tests for large commercial firms and government agencies. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ed.
Thank you. I appreciate your kind introduction. All right. If we could have my slides up here, that would be fantastic. Good morning. I'm Ed Skoudis. It is an honor to be able to speak with you today. Bruce's presentation has got me a little bit nostalgic here, and I as he was going through that, I remember Pete Shipley's talk on war driving. I remember the Gobbles fiasco of a presentation. It was, as performance art, it was just incredible. And to introduce myself here, I'd like to give you some context of my relationship with the hacker community in those days. To kind of do an intro slide for myself, I thought it would be nice to put kind of a little SSL certificate up here and to have my details under the general tab there on Internet Explorer 11 for some of the stuff that I've done. I started playing Capture the Flag games at DEF CON back in 1996, 97, 98. And I cut my teeth on some CTFs, Capture the Flag games, that were written and created by the ghetto hackers. And they did some amazing, amazing work. That's where I learned what makes for a good, intriguing, interesting, high-value Capture the Flag, written by the ghetto hackers, which I think makes Bruce's point quite well. And I learned from that, and I thought, is there a way that I can start building this stuff into the courses that I create? And I created a couple of Capture the Flag events for my SANS 504 class and my SANS 560 class. And about 7 years ago, I thought, we teach these classes, that's fine, but is there a way that we could create something that has more scale, that more people could participate in, more people could learn from in doing Capture the Flag? So I created an organization. It's called CounterHack, and in effect, it's kind of a skunkworks organization for SANS and trying to create really effective, you can call them simulations if you'd like, but they're effectively Capture the Flag events to help train people appropriately. That's been my focus for the last several years, and I'd like to talk with you today about some lessons that we've learned in creating these things. So I'd like to talk about some goals and maintaining skills. This is kind of the motivation here. I'd like to discuss with you some learning of the foundations, and then some ideas of what we're trying to convey in hands-on labs. We spent a lot of time over the last several years experimenting, trying to innovate. And we've had some successes, we've had some failures, stuff that we thought would be fantastic and it broke, stuff that we thought might not work and it went great. And I'd like to go over those with you because I hope you can use those ideas as you're training your own cyber warriors. I'd like to talk about flipped classrooms, gamification, trying to incorporate the real world into our challenges. We'll get into team-based interactions. We'll talk about industrial control systems, how you can model all of that, and how to achieve scale, one of the hardest things of all, and one of the most important things for you folks in the Army. All right, so I'd like to show you this slide here to kind of drive the motivations. What do we want to achieve with our cyber warrior training? We'd like to have them have skills that stick, right? We don't want skill atrophy, and a cyber range can help us achieve that. A place where people can go to practice their skills, just like you might have a shooting range. Can we do the same thing for cyber? Continued updated training with first hands-on experience, including things like industrial control systems, so that you can build those skills in what affects the real world. We want people to be familiar with tools and avoid this unfamiliarity. There's a bunch of research that's been done. I mean, it's fairly intuitive that if people don't use these skills, these hands-on keyboard skills regularly, they go away. A substantial skill loss with non-practice or non-use. We work our hearts out to teach these classes and then to read statistics like 87% of what's taught in the classroom is gone within 30 days. How do we refresh that? The human mind can hold so many working, active objects within it, and then they atrophy over time afterwards. We got to refresh that. So how can we achieve this? I would suggest to you that doing really good simulations in a cyber range is a fantastic way to keep this stuff fresh. So what would we like to have as attributes in our cyber warriors? And by that, I might mean folks from operators to planners to tool designers and evaluators. First, hands-on ability is really helpful. There is a place for theory, but the ability to put your hands on a keyboard and cause effects or prevent effects is vital. And we'd like them to understand the underlying concept. Somebody mentioned this morning about the importance of education. We like the raw education to happen before they come into our environments so that we can instill additional training on specific tools and reinforce certain lessons. I also think it's vital for each of these cyber warriors to understand offense, defense, and analytics. Sometimes people will look at our stuff and say, oh, that's just too offensive. But it's important for them to understand the offense so they can do the defense. Or they might look at another thing and say, that's too defensive. When we build these things, we're trying to model three things simultaneously: offense, defense, and analytics. Analytics might be used in an offensive fashion, and it might be used in a defensive fashion, or it might just be pure analysis. Maybe you're doing that for attribution or something like that, that may be independent of offense or defense. Offense does inform defense, so even your defensive guys need to know what the attackers will do so they can anticipate their moves and respond effectively. And one of the trends that I've been noticing as we get more and more advanced people working through our stuff is that at sufficiently advanced levels, it's fascinating how offense and defensive skills kind of blur together. I wrote a paper on this about a year ago about how I've seen different things where we'll have somebody that's doing some incredible analysis of malware, of very advanced malware, and that guy's got some great ideas for how to create his own offensive capabilities, and vice versa. Or, for example, an offensive capability is maybe planting command and control in the target organization and keeping that very subtle. Those kinds of skills are also defensive because you're maintaining the defense over your own command and control infrastructure. So that's why we're trying to model both offense, defense, well, and including the underlying analytics as well. We'd also like ultimately to build decision-making, experience, and finally, to the extent we can achieve it, wisdom. Okay. So let's talk about how we could do this, especially with the lab work. Are you familiar with the concept of the flipped classroom? My brother is a high school teacher, and he originally introduced this idea to me a few years ago, and I realized when he told me this, it's like that's actually what I've been working on for years already, but I never called it that. The flipped classroom is based on this concept. Historically, we would have lectures where you'd have an instructor telling students who physically move to that classroom ideas and concepts in a traditional education environment. Then you would break out to do the hands-on labs. And the hands-on labs you might do on your own at home, or maybe we do it as a little sliver of the interactive classroom environment. That's traditional learning. That was built and perfected over 100 years to help train people so that they could go work in factories. But now we need people that are more clever in their ability to synthesize ideas and to use them in a hands-on fashion. So the idea of the flipped classroom is we use the time that we're able to be together where, well, instead of having lecture, we will do the interactive piece. We will work our way through scenarios. We'll work our way through hands-on stuff because it costs a lot of money to move all these people together and to have somebody there to instruct them. They can work on the lecture-based stuff remotely on their own. So with that said, I'd like you to all bring out your laptops right now, and we're going to flip this. No, I'm kidding. Some of you looked at me in horror, right? Yeah. But this idea of the flipped classroom is profound, and we're working on some new classes that we've just developed in the last year where it's 80% hands-on and only 20% lecture. So the instructor rolls in the morning and gives you a briefing for 30 or 45 minutes saying, here's the kinds of stuff you're going to apply today. I hope you've looked at those briefings before you've gotten here, and we're going to spend the rest of the morning on hands-on labs, working your way through. Then in the afternoon, after lunch, you come back in, you get another 30 to 45 minutes of briefing, and then you go and do more hands-on stuff for the rest of the day. I think it's a tremendously powerful way to learn, and we've done some measurements, and it seems to stick better than the traditional unflipped classroom. Also, actually doing via merely hearing or even mimicking. When I write labs for the various classes that I teach, I have my labs in two modes. One is a mode that I call expository. That means we're going to go on a little adventure together, but I'm going to hold your hand, and I will say, okay, click here, type this command in, do this, look at the output, do you see that? That's expository, and there's a value in that, right? Just walk them through how to achieve things. It's instilling skills. I much prefer, though, the challenge-based labs, which is based on what you've known already, based on maybe some earlier expository stuff, I'm going to issue you a series of challenges. Try to achieve this, then try to achieve that. I always include full answers in an expository fashion in case they can't get there. What I really like is when they look at my explanation of how to do the challenge and they've got a better way to do it. That's the hacker, right? I love that. And they come up to me, hey, have you ever seen this? I did it this way. It's much more efficient than your recommended solution. It's like, dude, that is fantastic. And real-world scenarios are vital. You want to expose folks to what they're really going to see. This starts to build this idea from expository, flipped classroom to expository lab to challenge-based lab into a concept called gamification. You've heard it a couple of times. Colonel Conti mentioned it this morning, gamification. Some people, when they hear gamification, dismiss this and saying, oh, it's a game. I need something better than a game, Mr. Skoudis. Actually, I don't get too hung up on that word game in gamification. Gamification, by definition, is applying the principles of learning, competition, and yes, fun to try to instill better retention of ideas and also more willingness and participation. That's what gamification is. And there's a lot of principles of gamification. There's some fantastic websites on gamification. Gamification involves things like having different levels. So you achieve an interim goal, you level up, you move on to a deeper goal, you level up, you're building and acquiring your skills. There's typically some sort of score, and score increases rather than decreases in most games. The human brain is almost wired to kind of get into that and get excited about it. Yeah, and visualization is crucial. The ability to sense of where you are, how far you are into your given challenge, and that you're making progress moving forward. We're wired to like that stuff. And we can create very compelling learning using that. And it occurred to me, capture the flag tournaments are that. It's fantastic stuff. Also, you give them rewards, little icons, or some little merit badge that they've gotten this far. And gamification is going into all kinds of things, including elementary school learning. My brother's using some of this in his high school learning, and we've seen it really light people up in our training. Building on top of gamification, you can ultimately move to a cyber range. An environment where people can go in, maybe during structured time, you give them explicit time that you have to go to the cyber range at this time, maybe on an exercise or a specific lab. Also, we find it quite useful to just make the lab available to them. Recommend to them, we expect you to spend a couple of hours a week on this, but you do it during your own spare time. And when you see them go, and those people are particularly motivated and excited, that's cool. And we've modeled these ideas in something called Net Wars, which is a cyber range where you have offense, defense, and analytic challenges, all based on computers. We've modeled it in Cyber City, as well as a SANS course called Sec 561. For all of these things, though, we created something, an idea that we're very happy with, and you might want to use this in your own training environments. We call it our automated hint system. The concept is, what if a person gets stuck? Working his way through one of your challenges, maybe in some sort of gamified challenge environment, or maybe it's an outright cyber range, and he or she's stuck. What do? Do you just say you lose, sit there and just spin your wheels? We have a system that we built. It's not terribly sophisticated, but the idea is really helpful. You can take a hint. You say, I'm stuck, and it gives you a hint. The first hint in any of our cyber ranges simply defines the terms for you. Here's what we mean about what you're supposed to be doing. Because maybe you've learned it under a different terminology, so if we explain it in a more generic or more broad terminology, you'll get it. Maybe you don't. So you go and ask for the second hint. The second hint will start describing to you what we see as the most commonly missed step or intellectual challenge that people don't often have the ability to leap over. That's the second hint. The third hint starts driving you toward a solution, and by the time you get to the fourth or fifth hint, we're essentially telling you how to do it. We have chosen in our cyber ranges to not take points away for taking hints. We do this on purpose because we don't want people to try to get around the hint system. Hey, they want to keep their score up, so they'll call us on the phone or send us email asking for hints. Nope, all hints come from the hint system. That's where you have to go. We want to encourage people to take hints. We don't decrement their score, but we do maintain a hint count. So that if one person gets 138 points taking 3 hints, and another person gets the same number of points but takes 40 hints, we can get a sense of the delta there. Another thing that we learned, we first put the hint system out there, people loved it, but what they said is, when I conquered a challenge, I wanted to see your hints, but I didn't want to drive up my hint count afterwards. I conquered it on my own, but I want to see how you did it, Ed, so I could do it better. So we added, this is a simple little thing, but we now show all of the hints after somebody finishes it, whether they use the hints or not, because that contributes more to learning. Simple concept. We didn't expect it in the beginning to be valuable. Why would we give you the hints after you solved it? Because I want to learn. Nice. That's fantastic. So the automated hint system is quite valuable. And the stuff that I'm talking to you here about today is not just hypothetical. It is being used by the Army in the 255 Sierra program. They have access to our Net Wars continuous system throughout all aspects of training. If you look at the 25 Delta program, They also have this access to cyber range so they can build up their skills, and it's included as a capstone event in the 25 Delta training. So, it was about 4 years ago, I had visited Hurlburt Field, right, Air Force facility, and we were talking with them about some of these ideas of challenges and so forth. And Colonel Brian Denman came out, and we were having a meeting with him, talking to him about the stuff that we built in NetWars and our automated hint system and so forth. And he said, that's fine, but you've got a problem. What do you mean? What's the problem? He said, there's no kinetic stuff in there. All the stuff that you've created is focused on getting access to computers, analyzing the networks. That's all good. We need those skills. The networks and the data that reside on them are hugely important. But we need the physical components. The way he enunciated it was this. He said, we need to train our cyber warriors to understand that cyber action has kinetic effects. He says, you figure out a way to do that, and we'll be very interested. Now, I'd like to say, well, the answer is obvious. You just do this. It wasn't obvious. It took 4 months of brainstorming for us to come up with a way to approach this. And here was the idea. What if we were to build a miniature city, 6 feet by 8 feet? And we'll have on the city little buildings, right, and so forth, and we'll have streaming video cameras so that you can see the kinetic action. While the city itself will be a model, we'll use real-world industrial control systems. We'll put in the city a power grid. We'll put in the city water control systems. We don't actually have flowing water in the city because electronics and water don't get along very well. But we do have water control systems. We'll put in a traffic system in the city. We'll put in all of these different infrastructures in the city and then model different challenges. In fact, we won't even call them challenges anymore. We'll expand upon the idea of individual challenges and we'll stitch them together into missions, where your mission as a cyber warrior is to either achieve or thwart some kinetic effect that an adversary is trying to wield upon the city. And that's the idea that eventually became known as Cyber City. So we're using this miniature scale model city, but with a real power grid and other components. Here's a picture. Folks had mentioned some of the CTF stuff. You can see here the streaming video from Cyber City. This is an event that we did on June 10th down at Fort Gordon, where we had about 30 operators working their way through different missions. It was wonderful to see them applying their skills and the different levels. They were working together as teams. Teams ranged between 7 and 10 people, so we could see them interacting. It was really pretty cool. It was an honor to participate in it. So our missions in Cyber City are all team-based. If you look at the current training throughout the U.S. military, but especially in the Army, there's not a lot of team-based stuff for, I'll use the term, cyber. The folks, when they're ultimately employing this in action, are going to be working as part of teams. You want to instill in them individual skills, of course, but they have to, as part of their training, work through this stuff as missions. So everything we built in Cyber City is designed to work as a mission and as a team. So you have specialization within the team, different people with different skill sets, and team leadership. We're trying to model that to make sure that we have effective communications, effective decision-making. And we built our challenges big enough. So here's the scenario. You say, okay, Ed, you built this stuff as teams. What's to stop it from having one genius on the team that just solves everything and everybody else rides on the genius's coattails? We'll make the missions big enough that actually forces you to work together as a team so that no single human can get through it all in the amount of time that is allotted, but has to. Maybe you still have that genius, but the genius is going to have to farm out subtasks, or else the mission attack surface is just too big to achieve what you need to achieve in the time that we give you. Cool. We've also structured the missions within Cyber City, this little miniature city, so that they have formal operation orders. We wanted to convey the concepts of what you're trying to achieve in a kinetic fashion in a way that would help instill learning, but also would dovetail on the training that they've already got. So you get an op order at the beginning of the mission, and you work your way through trying to achieve the goals set forth in your op orders. In one of the missions, we actually have a frag order that comes out halfway through that changes your goal. Mike Asante, who will be presenting a little bit later, has done a lot of that op orders work for us. I thank you very much for that, my friend. Very cool stuff. All right, so we got op orders, we got frag orders, there's some other screenshots. In fact, on this particular screenshot, if you look really, well, you can't see it from where you're sitting, the root password for one of the systems is on that screenshot. And when we took this picture, we thought, should we use this or not? And I thought, you know, if you're going to look at that carefully enough to pull off the root password for one of our systems, you deserve that root password. All right. So here's some of the missions that we've built inside of Cyber City. In one of the missions, the bad guys, terrorists in this scenario, have hacked into a power company, and they have shut off the lights. The residential quadrant of Cyber City is now dark. Your job is to retake control of those assets, those power grid components, and turn the lights back on. That's what you need to do. It's pretty powerful. I remember when I originally started to talk about this with a bunch of our friends in the power utility space. And I presented it to them this way. I said, look, I'm going to give you a scenario that we're working on in Cyber City. It's going to sound contrived. But the scenario is terrorists take over a power station, they shut off the power, and they reconfigure the computer system so that the utility company employees can't log into them and turn the power back on. I said, I know that last step seems a little contrived, but work with me here. And there was a guy, utility company guy, raised his hand. He said, Ed, that's not a contrivance. You've just nailed our worst case scenario. That could happen. I'm thinking, oh man, it's kind of, yeah, it was very daunting when he said that. But it meant that our mission was actually interesting and useful. Another one that we've got is you have to fight through a denial of service attack. There's a flood happening against the landing strip in Cyber City. Colonel Conti displayed a picture earlier of that landing strip. There's a flood against its lighting so that you can't safely land aircraft on that landing strip. You have to figure a way out to either neutralize the denial of service flood or get your way around it or otherwise come up with a solution that allows you to control the computers in light of the denial of service so that the lights come back on. We've got other missions associated with gaining reconnaissance of the battle space so you can get into the various cameras. Remember, there's 5 cameras around Cyber City. People don't travel to it. They access it across the internet. There's been some tremendous work done in this space by Idaho National Labs, and there's a few people that are here from that organization. We've learned a lot from them. One thing that we've done with Cyber City is to get remote access to it, rather than requiring people to fly into wherever Cyber City happens to be occurring. So it's all done remote access with those video cameras. One of our most interesting missions, from my perspective, is to restore the integrity of the water supply. In this mission, the bad guys have manipulated the human-machine interface, the HMI that displays the water quality, to make it look like the water quality is bad, it's contaminated. Your job is to make sure that the HMI is properly reflecting the actual state of the water. Because what would a human do if he sees a water indication that says that the water is contaminated? He's going to take action to fix the water. But if the water's actually not contaminated, the action to fix the good water could contaminate it itself. That's what we're trying to model, to ensure that the HMI is properly displaying what it should. We built a lot of infrastructures to do this. When I first took on this project, I thought, this is going to be fun. Work on this for a year, get this thing done, and there you go. This is the hardest project I've ever worked on. I mean, how hard could it be to build a city that's 6 feet by 8 feet? This is probably going to be many, many years. I've been working on it over 3 years right now. When we first came up with the idea, we started talking with our friends throughout the Army, throughout the Air Force, and so forth, to get ideas so we could build stuff that's meaningful for them. So we got these video cameras. We've got a power grid that uses Siemens, Allen Bradley, and Phoenix Contact PLCs, programmable logic controllers. We've got a natural gas pipeline that was just deployed in Cyber City 2 weeks ago, and you can control the valves of the natural gas. It's not actual natural gas because natural gas burns. Burning is bad. So instead, we have glowing tubes, and you can turn on or off the valves, and you can tell through the video camera whether there's natural gas in the tubes because you'll see it glow or not. We've got a water reservoir, as I mentioned before. We've got a traffic light system where the bad guys try to manipulate the traffic lights. Military base with a rocket launcher. We've got the aircraft runway. We've got a train, and the switching junctions for the train are SCADA controlled. So the bad guys might try to derail the train. You've got to make sure the train keeps running. We've got an ISP infrastructure with routing, DNS. We've got network time protocol servers. We've got a trouble ticket system. There's a bank with online banking, so attacks against financial infrastructures. There's a hospital, and the mission we have associated with the hospital is the bad guys go into the coffee shop, a hotbed of terrorist activity in Cyber City. They go into the coffee shop where the doctors and the bankers go, and they hack into the laptops of the doctors and bankers and ride across the VPN to get into the bank or the hospital. In the hospital mission, they're trying to manipulate the prescription medication of the mayor of Cyber City. Cyber City has 20,000 residents, and residents are data. So everybody was born at a certain time, and they have records in the hospital. Some of the people in Cyber City have bank accounts. Each person that is employed has a job working for one of the entities. Some people work at the coffee shop. Some people work at the natural gas company. Some people work at the chemical factory and more. So we have all this concept of distributed data throughout the city to make the missions more realistic. We've got a newspaper. This is fun. The newspaper is available via the web, and it automatically publishes articles when kinetic things happen inside of CyberCity. So if you're able to successfully turn on the lights again, the newspaper says, mysterious power outage has ended, and the power has been restored. And it just automatically gets published. We've got a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi. We've got social networking sites. We have one called FaceSpace. It's kind of like Facebook and MySpace. And we have one called The Wire, which is like Twitter. And there's constant action of the characters in CyberCity sending messages to each other, updating their status on FaceSpace, tweeting, or as we call it, wiring, right? And there's a lot more in this. So here's some pictures of it. Here's sort of Main Street in our commercial quadrant. It's 4 quadrants. We've got a commercial quadrant, we've got an industrial quadrant, we've got a residential quadrant, and we have a military quadrant. So there's your commercial quadrant. You've got your bank, your hospital. There's a billboard mission where you have to hack into the billboards and send a message to the inhabitants of CyberCity saying the zombie apocalypse has been thwarted. Don't worry about the zombies. All right? You'll see American flag in there, entirely American flag at this point, CyberCity is. Here's our industrial quadrant. We've got our little substation for power distribution, quite realistic looking. The train is rolling by. Here's our water reservoir and water tower. You can see a traffic light here as well. Here's the CyberCity Sentinel, and you can see the article that was just published, CyberCity Power Restored After a Mysterious Outage. Here's our power grid. It's actually on a little rack that's mounted underneath the table. And here's CyberCity at night. Got some of these buildings and so forth all lit up, very pretty. All right, so there you go. So building these skills via cyber ranges and including kinetic components. The hardest thing of all of these, whether it be individual classes, gamification, building cyber ranges, and especially modeling the kinetic impacts, is this. How do you achieve increased scale? We could do this for dozens of people easily. We can do it for hundreds of people stretching. How do you do it for thousands of people? And that's something we're working on. We're working on trying to build it up even further. Distance learning can help here. One of the things that we're experimenting with is how can we scale up training to thousands of people with a finite number of instructors. Distance learning can help there, but even then we're finding we don't have enough capable instructors to do this kind of stuff. So we did an experiment just a few weeks ago that was actually quite interesting. The idea is we have recorded training. And you could just have somebody go through the recorded training on their own, but how do you know if they're really absorbing it? So the concept that we experimented with, and I was a naysayer. I didn't think this was going to work, but it did. I was wrong. So the idea is to have a classroom full of students at a military base go through the online training, but stop them every hour, hour and a half. And not have an instructor there in the room, but instead to have a TA or a mentor that says, okay, we just heard the canned audio and saw the video of the instructor. Now let's talk about it. Are you understanding it? Do you have questions? And then they go through quizzes in real time. So that way, you don't have to have an instructor constantly available or constantly traveling the world to do so. So it's online training, but in a classroom together with really effective TAs and mentors, and we think this can be a helpful piece. I'm not saying we're going to eliminate the actual human instructors. They're important. But this is a way to achieve additional scale. All right, so in conclusions, there's a lot of innovation going along. I really find this hands-on gamification all the way up to cyber range a very effective way to engage people and to instill long-term lessons. Classroom environments can be adapted, the flipped classroom and so forth, to achieve better learning. And above all, we need to focus on regular skill-building practice. Practice, practice, practice. Are there any questions? Yes, sir. Right. That is a really good question. The gentleman's point is there's this sense in CTFs, Capture the Flag events, that you have to constantly have the freshest content, and you constantly have to revamp them, and that is hard and expensive, and doing it with quality is the most difficult thing of all. So do we just keep sending people through the same thing again and again, or is there some other way that we can change it? Some of the things that we've experimented with to good end is one is to build your challenges in a sense like you'd have in a shooting range where you have movable walls. So you can slide in different modules, you can slide out different modules. So some person who goes through this might experience something that he saw before, and he can get through that quickly, but then right after that there's something he's never seen before. You could also do some pretty interesting things where maybe it's capture the flag and he's going through the exact same challenge, but the flag itself has been changed. That you could do that to try to minimize cheating, so if you remembered the flags. The other thing is, I wouldn't rule out the value of having somebody go through something they've already gone through. We do this with Net Wars a lot. We refresh the main Net Wars challenge set every year and a half. So there'll be somebody who comes through Net Wars today, and then they might go through it again in 3 months or 5 months. But what we find is only 4.7% of our players get to level 4. We have 5 levels. So, everybody gets into level 1 because we spot you that. Level 2, you get maybe 60, 70%. Level 3, you might get 20 or 30%. Level 4, it's 4.7%, which breaks my heart because level 4 is one of the hardest ones to build. The only thing harder to build than level 4 is level 5, which is less than 1%. It took us more time to build level 5 than it did 1, 2, and 3 together. Okay? So what you do is you put them through it, and they get their way up maybe to level 2 this time. 3 months later, you start them out again at level 1, see how quickly they get to where they were before. You hope they're going faster. If they're not, what's going on? And then they get a little deeper. And then you can chart progress, and you get them deeper and deeper. We have within the system something we call scorecards. We don't call them report cards because that sounds a little too pedagogical, right? And we're trying to make this gamified and fun. Scorecards tell you what you did great on and tell you where you have an opportunity for further learning. That's a nice way of saying tell you what you didn't do great on, right? So we will sometimes, in fact, very often run people through the same thing to see if they get through faster and to see how much deeper they get. And if they're not getting deeper, something got stuck in their training. And if you turn on the hints for that, and with even hints, if they can't get deeper than they did last time, you might want to look back at the training. Other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. Any thoughts on force-on-force exercise? Our current level 5 is force-on-force. It is entirely computer-based, right? So it's a traditional CTF. You've got a red box and a blue box, and you're using your red to attack the other guy's blue. You could also call it castle-on-castle, which is the model that we've put in there, and that works just fine. But force-on-force with industrial control systems and kinetic effect, that is something we're working on right now, and it is hard because you want to, it's this whole issue of concurrency, and how can you have multiple different forces? We're thinking of taking Cyber City, and it's 4 quadrants. So each different group, each different team would be assigned a quadrant, and your job is to play red and blue. You can break out sub-teams if you want for your quadrant. Oh, and your red should be attacking the other quadrants, which each has a red and blue. So we're working on that, but that is a really hard undertaking. Because you don't want people to defend their networks by just simply shutting off their industrial control systems. You don't want somebody to be able to break somebody else's industrial control systems beyond recoverability. Yeah, so we're working on that. Simple revert of a virtual machine is nice in the computer world, but we are using some real industrial control systems here. Yes, sir?
You alluded to the challenge of assessors in your slide, and I'd offer that what we've learned is we quickly run out of warrant officers, because they're mostly our assessors.
Yep.
So
So the gentleman's question is assessors. They rapidly run out of warrant officers, he says, to assess how things are doing and how people are developing and where they need to push on their skills. We have the same issues, same problems. So we've tried to automate as much as possible to measure people's actual hands-on capabilities. We still like to have white team participation so that they can observe, because you can get more than you can get out of any automated system. But we do have some psychometricians that are working on within the Net Wars infrastructure to make sure that we can tell whether you have really achieved these skills, you've really developed them, because psychometrically, the particular sets of challenges that you've achieved indicate that you are a highly skilled individual. So we're trying to automate as much as we can, but still we feel that white cell participation to observe and assess people's real personality styles. We're also doing some things, we haven't turned this on yet, but I think there might be some really interesting stuff with it, is the ability to do keylog capture of the cyber warriors as they're in action. Maybe ultimately this could go even to getting streaming video of their screens. But right now, looking at keystroke capture, because there's a lot of interesting things that you can tell on that. In just the way that somebody configures their tool, or the typos that they make, even the way they structure their command lines. Different people have different personalities on that, and you might be able to tweak that a little bit for efficiency. So what you bring up is an important point. We're working on it too, but we haven't cracked the nut there yet entirely. Yes, sir? Yes. It's so good that you brought that up. So Colonel Conti talked about, this is all about gathering data so that you can watch what people achieve and so forth. They asked me to repeat the questions for the video in case people can't hear it. We're embarking on a new thing. It's an experiment, and on the surface this might sound a little creepy, okay? But bear with me for just a second. To actually put people in the classroom who are there to watch how other people experience the classroom. Just so that we can see, are they learning by just listening to this guy talk up in front of the room? Are they learning by typing things into their keyboard and so forth? Are they, how are they engaging in the challenge? What are the frustration points? And we're going to do an experiment on this, actually. It's coming up in November. I'm teaching a class on penetration testing and red teaming, and we're going to have a couple people in the classroom that are there not to watch me, but they're there to watch the other students and see how they engage. I'm really excited about that. It sounds a little weird, so we'll be watching the students, but I can't think of a better way to figure this out. Other questions? Oh, thank you. All right.